Welcome back to Insight. We are talking about smart cities and what they will mean for India's urban future. I'll continue with Professor Kundu. You were raising your hand.
I'm happy that some people can still talk about democratic process in urban governance, because before a decade we were talking about empowerment of the local bodies. 74th, 73rd constitutional amendment were there just to ensure that the local bodies have the decision-making power and the role of the state-level agencies is minimized. Now what's happening? We have the decision-making power in a way coming from, Bloomberg philanthropy. They are looking at the 4 dimensions which has been specified. That is Swachh Bharat, that is Make in India and governance. But the interpretation and the indicators would be theirs. There is Price Waterhouse, which is the knowledge partner. EU is giving the templates. And we have special purpose vehicles being created for each city. I was just wondering what's happening to those scholars who have been talking about empowerment of the local bodies. In this whole process, the role of the local body would be to invite some private consultants and to prepare the proposals to be submitted for. I was just thinking that whether this objective of decentralized governance for urban development has become of very little importance now. The other point I wanted to mention, Amandra, we talk about inclusive development. Let me give you some statistics. Percentage of poor, I'm giving you all national sample survey data. Percentage of poor in the urban areas in 73-74 was something like 52%. Percentage of poor now has gone down significantly, and the million-plus cities have about 10% of the people who are poor. Basically because the cities have become exclusionary. The poor, dispossessed farmers no longer can come to the big cities because the space is available to those who can afford. You are raising the issue about water supply and sanitation. I'll give you the latest figure from 2008 to 2011-12. You find that the percentage of people having drinking water facility either through tap or from bottled water has gone down from 77% to 73%. Percentage of people who have to go beyond 200 meters to get the water has gone up. People who had no access to any solid waste disposal was 21% in 2008. Now it has gone up to 24%. I'm simply saying these are the critical issues. The major concern that we have, I will tell you, that should be the macroeconomic concern, that in the next 3 decades, we will have 420 million people who will have to be shifted from agriculture to non-agricultural activities. Do we have the vision of urbanization which can take these people from the farm sector and absorb them meaningfully in the non-farm sector? Do we need big cities? Because big cities are becoming exclusionary. Shouldn't we have a much more balanced, spatially dispersed, small and medium towns coming up so that we can address the basic need of absorption of the people and shifting people, workers from agriculture to non-agricultural activities?
Okay. Professor Kapadia, this mass urbanization that we are witnessing like never before, something that only China has experienced in the past. Don't you think we need solutions like like Professor Kundu has suggested?
I agree to a very great extent what Professor Kundu is saying. Larger cities are becoming very exclusionary. And we are talking about inclusive cities and inclusive planning. Now please don't forget, India is basically a feudal country. We have a feudal mindset and we have been governed in a feudal manner for a very, very long time. All our governance, including the city governance, the urban local bodies, have been top heavy. Now suddenly, in the last couple of decades, we are told that, it has to be so inclusionary that people must participate in decision making. Now, there is a certain turnaround. People who were not cared about, who were not seen to be the recipients of the end product of anything that was good, are suddenly made partners in preparing plans and making the city plans. Now, this is a very big challenge and a mindset change.
Okay.
Although 73rd, 74th Amendment, they all work towards that, but in reality, our municipal corporations and our local bodies are not really equipped to handle this change. And as Ravindran said some time back, there are not people who even understand what is required in order to be listed on this, short list for smart cities. Now, this all means that we have to bring around several changes at several levels. One, of course, people have to become more responsive and take things in their own hands, but the local government bodies need to pep up themselves, and this needs all kinds of training programs, maybe capacity building, understanding the issues in the right context, so that tomorrow we are able to generate all these problems and solve these problems by our own expertise. We don't have to go to the Bloomberg Foundation or to Price Waterhouse. So, there is a very strong need for working towards that.
Okay, Mr. Bishnoi, towards we have to make our local urban bodies, they have to be really reformed.
निश्चित तौर पर अब जैसे दिल्ली की स्थिति देखिए, दिल्ली स्टेट भी है, वो केंद्र शासित प्रदेश है, इसलिए पहले इसमें जिला भी एक ही था, डिस्ट्रिक्ट भी एक ही था. अब बाद में इसलिए कंज्यूमर कोर्ट केवल एक ही इसमें बनाया जा सकता था. उसमें जब पेंडेंसी बढ़ी, चर्चा बढ़ी, तो उसके बाद कानून को बदला गया और एक से ज्यादा किए गए. बाद में दिल्ली के 11 जिले बना दिए गए. अभी भी 11 जिले बनने के बाद भी म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन एक ही चल रही थी. पिछले दिनों पॉलिटिकल कारणों से उसको 1 से 3 में किया गया, लेकिन जो बाकी सारे देश का स्ट्रक्चर है कि हर जिले के अंदर कई म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशंस होती हैं, उसके स्थान पर यहाँ पर कई जिलों में एक म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन है. तो इसलिए एम्पावरमेंट लोकल लोगों को देने का जो मामला है वो कहीं ना कहीं डिफीट हुआ है. अब इस सारे सिस्टम को बदलने की आवश्यकता है, तब तो कोई बात आगे बढ़ेगी. और तीसरी बात यह है कि जिन प्रशासनिक स्ट्रक्चर जितने हैं हमारे, उनमें जो लेथार्जी है, उनमें जो सिस्टम में अवरोध हैं, उनको जब तक आप दूर नहीं करेंगे तब तक नीचे के जो यूनिट है वो सक्सेसफुल काम नहीं कर सकता है. अभी हर जगह सिस्टम ये है कि ऊपर से आप उसकी सैंक्शन लेकर आइए, नीचे के वाले को पावर हो तो भी ऊपर वाला उसको सैंक्शन करता है. इस तरह के उदाहरण आते हैं. अब जैसे मैंने पानी की बात की, तो पानी का दिल्ली में हम यदि ड्यूल सिस्टम करें, जो पीने का पानी है उसको हम थोड़ा महंगा कर सकते हैं, लेकिन बाकी सारे पानी को सस्ता करके हम लोगों का जो टोटल पानी पर खर्चा है उसको भी हम रिड्यूस कर सकते हैं. लेकिन उस तरफ सोचने की, जहां पर दिल्ली में सारा दिल्ली की सरकार या केंद्र सरकार सोचती है, वहां पर भी पिछले 50-60 साल में इस काम को नहीं किया गया है. तो इसलिए केवल एम्पावरमेंट म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन या लोकल बॉडीज के कम सोचने, कम पावरफुल होने या कम सशक्त होने के कारण ही ये समस्याएं, ऐसा नहीं है. ये तो सारा सिस्टम में कहीं ना कहीं स्मार्टनेस लाने की आवश्यकता है. और इन नई सिटीज में ये स्मार्टनेस होगी तो मुझे लगता है कि ज्यादा सक्सेसफुल हो पाएंगे.
Okay, so the entire system from top to bottom will have to smarten up. But Professor Ravindran, as Professor Kundu mentioned, there cannot be any international template that can be replicated in our cities. What will work for India?
Well, if you look at the examples of other smart cities, for instance in Korea or in any other countries, or in Holland, where this concept of smart cities have been applied earlier, their economic conditions are very different. We have 80% of the people who cannot access much of the systems here, whereas they have 80% of people who have the ability to access systems there. So there we are dealing with a totally different problem, both in terms of the nature of the problem as well as its size, because we are dealing with huge numbers. We have one city has the population of an entire country that you're talking about in Europe or anywhere else. Sometimes one city has larger population than some countries in Europe. So we are talking about a different scale of problems. So obviously you cannot do a cut and paste of what you see in some other location in our country. But all said and done, we can find 10,000 reasons as to why we should not do anything. or why we cannot do anything because there are so many problems. Well, there are these problems are in place. We all know that. The first thing is that we know that there is the problem and we recognize it, so that it gives us the leverage to define our action areas correctly and take it forward. In my opinion, we need to have everybody on board. We need to have international organizations, we need funding that comes from any kind of sources. Everything is required. But at the same time, we should have the capacity to protect our public interest. Now, that is the most critical thing. That's why initially itself I was emphasizing the fact that it's the training of the local body or the local governance systems to be able to deal with these outside organizations, which is of most critical importance. It is a tall, it's a tall order. The problem is of a very tall order, and it's not going to be easy to do it. But I would suggest that as the first part of the agenda of this entire Smart Cities program, the focus should be, at least for 1 year, on just training people to be able to deal with this avalanche which is going to come down, both in terms of investment as well as in the kind of political power that those investments will field. The local body should be in a position to should have the leverage to convert that into public interest in our cities. So when we can outline so many different problems, we have to find our area of action. There is no getting away from it. Otherwise, we just go down. And one of the things that goes down with along with this kind of development is that the environment becomes the first victim, because there's not so much interest in sustaining the local environment in people who come from outside and invest, because they look for a certain fixed time. They're not doing social work. They're here to do business. So they have a limited time period and a limited objective to meet. How do we protect our environment is our problem. It's not their problem. So that's why I'm saying that smartening up the people at the local level is the most critical thing to do.
Professor Kundu, let's focus on the challenges ahead now. Funding, many are pointing out, is a major issue, and that 100 crore a year is not enough. What do you think?
No, I think that's certainly a critical concern in implementing this program, this mission, because 48,000 crore, which has been budgeted for a period of 5 years, is certainly not enough for the smart cities. But you know, even if it is matched by equal contribution from the state, that's what is being envisaged. See, the total requirement which has been projected in various international journals is something at least 10 times this amount, which really means that maximum contribution that will come from the central government and the state government would be less than 10%. 90% or 88% would come through PPP, public-private partnership. That's why special purpose vehicles are being created. The main objective of this public sector investment is really to create an enabling environment. Then this question becomes extremely important, where I have really no problem in getting funding from all sources, as Dr. Ravindran was mentioning. The only question is, how do you ensure that the objective of pollution-free urban environment, inclusivity, etc., are being addressed? Why I am raising is that, well, we had fair amount of control over urban sector, urban governance through state and the local level bodies. But still, we have noted that the process of urbanization has become exclusionary. Access of the poor to the basic amenities have become less, and also the percentage of poor in the urban areas have become less. If that is what has happened, how do you expect, when you open it up to the multinational agencies, companies, even the Chinese company wants to bid in the telecom sector? You see, there are large number of companies who are eyeing, and I just would like to know if, for example, the French take up Varanasi to design it in the context of Toulouse, that's what is being talked about. How do you ensure that our environmental concerns are addressed? How, if the American companies take up Allahabad or Ajmer, which has a high percentage or poor even still today, how would their problems will be addressed? These are some of the critical areas of concern, because to say that yes, funds will be available from real estate sector, from PPP, is really pushing the problems under the carpet. You have to see to it that how this kind of a resource mobilization process would address the key concerns of the macroeconomy of building inclusive cities, and also reaching a growth rate of 6 to 7% which has been projected. That requires the cities to perform certain functions. Are we in a position to ensure that these cities, which will be developed with large number of stakeholders participating, would still address the macroeconomic concern of promoting a 6 to 7% growth rate?
Okay.
That is the concern.
All right, but Professor Kapadia, but we are also looking at attracting investment, which will in turn create jobs.
Yes, investment is essential, I agree. But I think in the Indian context, there is something which is far more important, and that is the environment. And when I say the environment, I mean that there is such a range of environmental problems in the Indian cities. And the Smart City Council, which is going to drop the framework, I hope they are aware of the fact that there is such a great diversity. And this diversity is something that needs to be really looked at and saved and controlled.
That council is linked with US
Smart City Council. That is where the problem is. You very rightly said that you hand over a city like Varanasi and they come out with the foreign model. So there is a very big danger there, and this danger is far greater than the money that is coming in. The money comes in, but the point is,
but this is where the role of urban local bodies
this is the role where
play.
Locals, starting with local urban body, the local professionals, the local intelligentsia, they must be able to put their minds together and come out with certain specialized functions of cities by region, because as I said earlier, this is not a magic formula where you make a computer program and press a few keys and you have a city ready, because that's the last thing that we want. What we want is, if you want to preserve and conserve the Indianness of the Indian city, which is essentially the same running through the country, and yet there are regional differences. And these differences must be prioritized. And then we must make a plan, action plan, which will, because in some cases the problem could be traffic, in some cases it's the air, some cases the water, some cases the natural features, the jungle, the ridge, and so on and so forth. So I think the real concern lies as to how we identify what are the critical areas of which region, and how do we sort of attack that problem.
Okay, Mr. Bishnoi.
नहीं, मुझे लगता है कि बहुत सारी समस्याएं अभी सामने हैं और बहुत सारी आशंकाएं हमारे दिमागों में हैं, क्योंकि अभी भी सरकार की तरफ से पूरी चीज सामने नहीं आई है। धीरे धीरे जैसे जैसे वो सामने आएगी, वैसे वैसे इन सब शंकाओं का निवारण होगा, और समय के साथ साथ जो समस्याएं होंगी उनका समाधान भी स्मार्ट सिटी में होगा। यदि नहीं होगा तो वो असफल रहेंगी। इसलिए सरकार का जो एटीट्यूड है, सरकार का जो टेम्परामेंट है कि इस तरह की जो भी समस्याएं सामने आती हैं उनको तत्काल सॉल्व करने के लिए आगे बढ़ा जाए। और अर्बनाइजेशन का मामला देश के सामने है ही है, और उसको सॉल्व करने के लिए इतनी बड़ी योजना को सामने लेकर आए हैं, ये सरकार का एक बड़ा अचीवमेंट है।
Right, at least a first step has been taken towards addressing the problem of urban livability. But Professor Ravindran, on the question of funding, Professor Kundu says the PPP model does not seem tenable. What do you think?
Well, if you look at the past experience of PPP in India, it has been very, very partially, to put it politely, it is only partially successful. In most cases, it has not worked. I'm sorry to harp back on the same point. It's because our governmental systems don't have the capacity to turn that private interest into public good. That's the main reason why they have flopped. It's not because there was no money flow, etc., etc. But one other critical thing which I'd like to add to what Professor Kundu had said is that when you look at this macroeconomics situation, and when you are pumping in so much money, and the local government has to raise 50% of the money to be able to match, or 100% of what the aid is coming in to be matched by the local body, we have never done any exercise on designing proper recovery systems from the people. only recovery system they have been talking about is pricing services, pricing water, for instance. It's been part of even the JNNURM program. But that is not the only way that you have to design the recovery system. The amount of thinking that's done at the microeconomic level in Delhi and in various think tanks abroad, everywhere, and in universities, a fraction of that is not done at the local economic level. So unless some serious thinking is done at the local economic level about how will we enhance the capability of municipalities and people to repay the money, that repay these benefits. Nothing comes free. Everything has to be paid back for in some way. And what are the ways we are going to recover this money?
Okay.
There is not sufficient thinking in the microeconomic area at the local level, either in housing or in services like water and sewage and electricity and so on. There has not been sufficient thinking at all. And one of the things that we need to do first thing is to make sure how do we design our recovery systems. If that is not done, we will simply increase the indebtedness of our municipalities and our people, for that matter, to various investors who come from outside. Because we will not have the capacity to pay back that money. And they're quite happy if they don't get it back, because they keep sitting and collecting more interest. The bank is interested in doing business. So, is our people capable of returning this money?
Okay.
If so, how do we design those systems which will make them capable of returning this money? And after some time, we'll own the systems that we actually benefit from.
Okay.
If you look at transportation, for instance, to make a smart transport system is one of the crying requirements of every city in India. You know? In JNNURM also, certain amount of efforts were made towards that. But what they did was they did it quite unthinkingly. For instance, they provided huge Volvo buses to small municipalities where the roads don't have enough turning circles for these big buses to turn. So they are sitting in some depot and just gathering dust. The municipality does not have the system even to run a proper telephone operator's booth. And they are supposed to electronically control the movements of these buses.
Right.
So they don't have the capacity. So the result is that the investment is gone from the municipality. They have already indebted to that financial mechanism, but they don't have the capacity to utilize that. So there are very serious issues from the economic perspective at the local level, which need to be addressed very, very urgently before this money actually begins to pour into the system.
Okay, so smart cities should be able to generate that capacity to be able to utilize it.
Yes, absolutely.
Professor Kundu, we are wrapping up the discussion. One last word from you. We don't have a time frame yet as to when we can have these smart cities ready with that are pollution free, that have those gleaming sky-rise buildings and automated garbage waste disposal system and so on, and tap water, drinking water on tap and so on. But at least a first step has been taken in that direction.
No, I'm very happy about one thing, that we have expanded the scope coverage in the urban sector intervention. Basically, JNNURM and RAY were the basic interventions, and the number was very, very limited, 65 or maybe 100. Now we have at least reached out to 500 under Amrut and 100 under smart cities. But basic concern that I have, I would really like to share this with everyone, is that by 2050, you talked about the time frame, our labor force would be something like 920 million out of 1600 million population. That means an increase of 420 million people who are asking for jobs. Our cities are exclusionary. Your growth rate of all the million plus cities, excepting two, Bangalore and Puducherry, you find there is a decline in the migration rate. How will you provide employment outside agriculture? Agriculture is not growing at a higher rate than 3%. Businesses are growing, manufacturing would be growing between 6 and 7%. How do you really, what kind of urbanization would absorb them? And I do think that we do need a large number of small and
Right.
medium towns, and the efficiency
And
of your
inclusive
investment.
cities, that will be smart cities. All right,
Absolutely.
on that note, it's
Absolutely.
time for me to wrap up this discussion here. I'd like to thank all my guests for coming to the studios. It was a pleasure having you all here. That's it for now in this edition of Insight. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.